Okay, there's our cue to go ahead and get started. Welcome to our June early intervention echo session. We're glad that you're here. If you will take a minute and put your name and contact information into the chat, that would be great. As you notice, we are recording today's session. It helps us improve quality. And we can always access these recordings at any other time. They're stored on our Canvas page and our YouTube channel. Again, today we will be sharing some videos that will not be part of the recording. So if all of a sudden you're watching the recording and you hear, we're going to watch this video, you may not see it because we are not sharing those videos. Echo, if you've never joined an Echo session, welcome to your first Echo session, but we hope that we are interactive within this. So if you will make sure to ask your questions, put your comments into chat. Kurt, one of our hub members, monitors our questions. But if you also have any questions about anything, you can reach out to one of our great hub members that all have an asterisk in front of their name or are going to have an asterisk in front of their name right now so that they're easy to identify in chat. We do talk about some sensitive topics, sometimes the families that we work with. So please make sure that we protect their individual privacy by avoiding any identifiable markers. With that, rename your profile and raise your hand if you have anything. Key components of an echo session are the didactic speaker. And then my favorite part is our case presentations, where we come up with a ton of recommendations for whoever's presenting a case. So if you have a family or a client that you're wondering about or need some support, please consider submitting a case presentation. You can do that by reaching out to earlyecho@usu.edu. Sorry, every time I move my button, my cursor moves, so then I can't forward my slides. We are going to be throughout today's session dropping in the survey link. And that's how we send out our certificates for attendance. You need to fill out that evaluation, and then once a month we mail out our certificates. Oh my, what the heck? I'm going the wrong way. You guys, we practiced this before and I'm the one who's messed it up. So now, Ashley, for sure you will be set on yours. So we do store everything on Canvas. It's also in iEcho. So if you want and you have not gotten access to our Canvas platform, please reach out to earlyecho@usu.edu and we will give you access to our Canvas page. We have the PowerPoints, past sessions, any case recommendations. So during our case recommendations or our case presentations, we do go into small breakout groups. So sometimes we don't hear what everybody is sharing, but they're always there available for anybody to go back and look at besides just the person who is presenting the case. You guys are all on this call are amazing professionals and you guys share some amazing recommendations. So if this case that we're going to hear today is similar to a case that you're working on, you might want to go back and look at all those recommendations and use those with the families that you're working with. And again, those are all on our Canvas page. Case presentations are a great way to just practice and get information from everybody on this call. We encourage you to submit a case, but know that sometimes it can be scary to present in front of our group. So if you have a case and the big holdup is you're presenting it, reach out to Early Echo and I'll be glad to share your case instead of you presenting it. So you're still getting that information. So again, reach out to Early Echo at aggies.usu.edu. We do have some social media where we share information that is shared with us about any of our ECHO networks throughout the IDRPP. So if you've not followed us on any of those social media platforms, please take a minute to do so. I'm really thrilled to have Ashley Stuart and her group continue our last part of this social communication series. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and let Ashley take it over.
Yes, thanks for having us back. Let's see here. All right. We are happy to present the final session in our series on social communication. As you can tell, our group is really enthusiastic about social communication, and we really believe and emphasize in the importance of social communication. And so I'm just grateful for all of you who have been with us for all parts of this series. If you have not, there are session recordings that would allow you to go back. But today we're going to be wrapping up our series together by continuing our conversation around supporting the child's social communication by utilizing and implementing a caregiver coaching model. In addition to myself, who is a psychologist in the Department of Pediatrics at the University of Utah, my team is also comprised of Jori Harris, who you'll be hearing from today as well, who's a speech language pathologist in the Department of Pediatrics. And then we've also been continually supported by our other team members, Stacey Manwaring and Sarah Houghton from Communication Sciences and Disorders. As Janelle mentioned earlier, we will be showing you some videos during today's presentation. We have permission from the families that you're going to see to show these videos. And so we just ask that you respect their confidentiality. So today in our final session together, our goal is really to continue the conversation around addressing common barriers to caregiver coaching while providing some tips for talking about the importance of teaching social communication skills to young children with communication delays. We then will discuss how to apply commonly used intervention strategies to elicit gestures in particular, and follow up by summarizing the main topics of the series through a case example. At the end of our last session together, we identified several themes in regards to barriers to implementing caregiver coaching. And I wanted to start our session today by taking a moment to talk about these barriers and maybe provide some thoughts as to how these barriers might best be addressed. First off, I wanted to emphasize that I really strongly believe that the most important step in beginning any parent-mediated intervention is the establishment of rapport. Rapport is often thought of something that we build with the child. However, it's equally important that we take time to establish it with the caregiver as well. Learning things like the caregiver's values, their parenting style, their learning style can offer us really valuable insight as we work collaboratively to develop goals and begin the intervention. For example, if you learn that the caregiver prefers a visual learning style, as opposed to a caregiver who's more of a dive right in kind of learner, we can then scaffold the learning of the intervention to suit the individual needs and break down that barrier of caregiver resistance. It's equally important to understand how a caregiver prefers to receive feedback. Some can be flustered by receiving in vivo feedback as they're doing the intervention. They may prefer instead to debrief at the end of the intervention session as a whole. For others, the reverse is true. And so again, really understanding the caregiver as an individual and also as a critical piece to the success of the intervention model is a process in and of itself, and it's one that sometimes takes a lot of time and can't be quickly achieved. Second, I know from doing a lot of parent-mediated intervention myself, I acknowledge that one of the most difficult and challenging situations is when you have a more passive caregiver. And they often can be one of the hardest barriers to caregiver coaching to overcome. Just having a caregiver who really prefers to watch you as the expert perform the intervention can be especially frustrating as the interventionist, especially because we know how important it is to continue to work on skills outside of these really brief therapy sessions. And what I've kind of found in my intervention practice is that often this kind of passive style with caregivers can stem from a knowledge gap. One, the caregiver may not understand the purpose behind using the caregiver as an interventionist. And so often in some of the initial sessions, I really emphasize having a straightforward conversation that addresses why we include caregivers in intervention. And that can be really helpful in encouraging some engagement in the sessions. Linking this conversation to those identified caregiver goals for their child can be especially motivating. For example, saying something along the lines of, I understand how stressful it can be to have a child who struggles to communicate. We share the same goal in wanting to expand your child's communication abilities so that everybody in the family feels more confident, both you and your child. And in order to really accomplish that shared mutual goal, we need to build new habits in our interactions. And in order to build those new habits, we have to practice these skills, right? Lastly, I like to emphasize that no one technique is going to be a perfect fit for all caregivers that you encounter. Some caregivers you encounter are going to be really quick learners. They'll pick up on these intervention strategies really easily, dive right in, kind of be those model caregivers. Others are going to need a lot more time, more structured practice, more coaching, right? Taking the time to scaffold the caregiver's learning, just as you do when working with a child, is really critical to having a positive caregiver coaching experience as well. Throughout our series, we've also really emphasized the importance of social communication skills in bridging the path to spoken language. And I wanted to provide you all with a few helpful examples that all are going to make the same point, which is that we have to teach social communication if we want our children to speak. But they're going to give you lots of different options for how you might go about explaining this importance to the caregivers that you work with. And the idea is for you to kind of find one of these examples, or maybe this just gives you some ideas of your own that might be more suitable for your style, so that when you're having conversations with caregivers, you can kind of rely on these examples. So, of course, you've seen this ladder several times in the past 4 months with us. So, of course, we would always emphasize using the ladder, remembering that the social communication skills that we talk about can be thought of as rungs on the ladder between that pre-intentional communication and the emergence of spoken language. And if we're missing rungs on our ladder, it's going to be much more difficult to get to the top of the ladder. Another analogy I often go to in talking about the importance of communication and how symbolic communication in particular is emphasized is by talking about the brain. I have some parents who are more scientifically driven and want to understand just the nuance of the brain and how it develops. And I know you've all probably encountered that caregiver that doesn't understand why we're working on pretend play. So talking about the fact that a lot of these symbolic processes, including spoken language, play, gestures, all boil down to that same region of the brain. All that information is processed in a similar area. And so in order to support the development of those things, we have to work on them all simultaneously. I also find families who identify with missing skills, right? The target symbol is one that I use a lot in kind of making this analogy to a child who might recognize the bullseye symbol or the letter T to their favorite store that they go to. And so they'll see that on a sign and they'll say, Target. If we were to jump to the assumption that that child actually knows how to read because they recognize the symbol and they maybe recognize the colors of their favorite store, we would really be missing a lot of those foundational skills, just like those missing rungs on the ladder. And so just like with reading, we want to make sure when we're on that path to spoken language, we're not missing those foundational skills, such as phonetic awareness that would help us learn to read. Many families I find identify with the more stressful periods of having a child who has difficulty communicating. And so sometimes understanding that having some type of way to express themselves, even if it's not a vocalization right now, it's just one nonverbal way of getting their needs met. Oftentimes we can see reductions in challenging behaviors when a child has a way to communicate. And therefore, we start to see less stressful interactions in the home. And then finally, similar to our ladder analogy at the beginning, could also use a roadmap to spoken language to make the same point. If we miss our stops for gas, our stops for food, our stops for rest along the way, we ultimately might get to our destination, but it's going to be a lot harder and a lot more challenging. In our last session, we covered different components of intervention, including collaborative goal writing, as well as the context in regard to intervention components. Today, we're going to be focusing for the first part on the individual strategies and practices that can be helpful in teaching social communication skills. I want to emphasize that these strategies are going to be familiar to you. They're purposely familiar to you. I'm utilizing things that you might already be doing in your regular intervention sessions. And I want to take these practices that we know to be evidence-based and help you see how helpful they can be in teaching important social communication goals, such as gestures. So we're going to take these really familiar practices and just put a new lens on them, looking at how they can be incorporated with gestures. So first, I want to anchor us back to the development of gesture. I provide on the slide the resource of the social communication growth chart. But I want you to know that if we knew the exact sequencing of gesture in typical development, we would show that to you. But that's just not how gesture development works. A lot of times, several gestures are emerging simultaneously and overlapping with one another in terms of their development. And so this is all to tell you that as you're selecting specific gesture targets for intervention, you can use resources such as the social communication growth charts to help you target the different forms and the different functions that a child may be missing from their repertoire. So for example, we could start by teaching reach to request, or maybe we have a child who has the ability to reach to request something. But we could take that reach and shape it into a point and maybe turn that point to request into a point for joint attention, thus increasing not only the different types of gestures that child is using, but the different purposes or functions as well. So let's start with environmental arrangement as one of the intervention strategies that you can use to elicit gestures. And what I mean by environmental arrangement is a series of manipulations to the child's environment that really create opportunities for communication. And one really important environmental arrangement when it comes to eliciting social communication skills is positioning. Emphasizing to the caregiver the importance of being on the child's level, establishing eye contact, and positioning themselves at a favorable distance to elicit communication can be key in teaching more targeted social communication goals. A second way we can arrange the environment is by providing choices between activities. Choices give the child an opportunity to communicate and also provide an opportunity for the caregiver to deliver what we term contingent reinforcement. That is to say, when the child communicates his desire for an activity, that activity is delivered. Thus, we're reinforcing that communicative attempt by the child. And it's really important to teach caregivers that choices can be communicated in a variety of different ways. So for a child who has very little nonverbal communication, they may simply communicate a choice by looking or gazing towards an object for an extended period of time. We can, however, take that gaze that they're doing towards the object and shape it gradually into a more communicative behavior by encouraging the parent to position themselves in the line of sight of the child and the object that the child is attending to, and rewarding establishing eye contact, even ever so briefly, rather than just looking directly at the object. Next, by keeping objects out of the control of the child, we're again able to create opportunities to communicate. Forgetting an object, such as a puzzle piece, creates an opportunity for the child to request the missing object. Keeping things out of reach could elicit communicative bids, such as pointing or reaching, while having materials inaccessible in a closed box may prompt a give gesture. In this video I'm going to show you, you're going to see how many aspects of environmental arrangement are used in a really simple puzzle completion activity, and how these different environmental arrangements in turn result in several different gestures being produced by the child. Next is imitation, and some of the best opportunities to elicit gestures occur when both the child and the caregiver are attending to the same activity. And we can really promote this shared attention by imitating things that we see the child do during play, and then expanding the teaching to more explicit imitation skills. By teaching the caregiver to imitate their child, it also paves the road for teaching the reciprocal nature of imitation, because the child is learning that imitation is a back and forth interaction. So for some children with very minimal imitation abilities, starting with something like object imitation can be an important first step. Teaching a child to imitate moving a car back and forth, for example, might reinforce a child's natural desire to play with the car, while also establishing an important skill of imitating what the caregiver has done. And from there, we can kind of expand to imitate more simple actions that can be easier to teach. Imitation is, of course, also really helpful to be targeted through natural play routines. If you don't have a list of your own started already, I would encourage you to write down a variety of different songs that have gestures that go along with them. Keep that list with you and encourage caregivers to create lists of their own. That way, caregivers have a nice menu of songs to use throughout the day that include gestures. I also really encourage families to implement songs with gestures that have contextual relevance. Now with the aid of super simple songs, it makes it very easy, as they have songs for almost every daily task that a child is going to encounter. Things like brushing teeth can be sung about while including gestures, having meals, and even playtime. We also wanted to emphasize the importance, of course, of being animated and exaggerated when we teach any sort of imitation skill. A child's much more likely to attend to a play routine when it's really exaggerated and interesting as opposed to being fairly neutral. And this can be a key in eliciting natural imitation of gestures during these play routines. I often encourage caregivers I work with that when they're playing and interacting with their young child, it should feel over the top. In fact, if somebody like a best friend in on them playing with their child, they might blush slightly from embarrassment as they're being so over the top. And that's exactly what's going to draw the child's attention and focus, with again that goal of having the attention to the same activity, being able to promote more imitation of skills. Next is modeling. With modeling, we don't want to simply just imitate things that our child has done, but instead we want to take and expand and show them the new communicative behaviors that could be possible. So say, for example, you have a child who maybe relies really heavily on placing a caregiver's hand on an object to request the object. So doing more of that hand as a tool. We can model a give for this child as an alternative to using the hand as the tool. During play, we can also model more emphatic and emotional gestures, like clapping really enthusiastically for a job well done, throwing our arms up in the air to express excitement, giving a thumbs up, high five, even starting the knuckles. And when doing so, we want to make sure that we also give a label for those gestures that we're producing. So saying high five as you put your hand up in the air provides context to that gesture for the future generalization of the skill. We can also use a lot of different activities to prime the likelihood that a gesture is going to occur by practicing activities that involve similar motor responses as the gesture itself. So for example, when playing with a poppet toy, you're going to need to isolate your index finger, and that could be used to prime a point. Priming a give might be accomplished by having the child practice placing items into a container. That way you're kind of priming that action of holding and releasing an object into something. Shaking the head for no could be elicited by offering the child a non-preferred food item. That often results in the child turning their head away from the non-preferred food, and then simultaneously looking to see what the caregiver's done with that non-preferred food when they turn their head away, to see that it's actually been removed. For a child who's initially reaching only to take an object, we could gradually do things like increase the distance between the object and the child, thus shaping a more communicative reach instead of that more primal reach to take an object. Purposely, I've saved physical prompting for last. First, I think that there are several important points to make when it comes to using physical prompting as an intervention strategy. Um, Physical prompting is, of course, a really valuable teaching tool that many individuals do benefit from. However, it can be used too frequently and too quickly as an intervention strategy. I therefore really like to emphasize a least to most hierarchy when teaching young children. So physical prompting should always be thought of as the most invasive type of prompt we use, and therefore really reserved for situations in which other teaching methods have not been successful. Additionally, when using physical prompting, we always want to use the least amount of physical guidance as necessary in order to execute the behavior. And this may range from a brief light nudge of the arm or hand to get it going, what we would term a partial prompt, to actually physically manipulating the hand to form the gesture. It's really important throughout your teaching sessions and to coach the caregivers through their teaching sessions to be constantly evaluating how much physical prompting is necessary every time the behavior is being elicited, and really fade away from physical prompting as quickly as possible. I think another important point about physical prompting to make is the respect for autonomy. Even young individuals have a right to pull their hand away or say what's uncomfortable for them. Some children are a lot more sensitive to touch. And so if you find yourself coaching a caregiver to use physical prompting and something doesn't seem quite right, the child doesn't seem comfortable with it, even the caregiver doesn't seem comfortable with, really being respectful of that autonomy and providing the caregiver with alternatives such as other intervention strategies to try to elicit the gesture or the target behavior. The other thing is having important conversations with the caregivers prior to starting using physical prompting about their comfort with that as an intervention technique. Some caregivers will come out right out of the gate and tell you that that's not something that they really want to practice or get into the habit of with their child. And knowing that up front can avoid some of those more awkward interactions down the road. These strategies that I've reviewed briefly are strategies that are also used in an intervention practice called reciprocal imitation training. And the idea with reciprocal intervention training is that the child's going to learn through naturalistic interactions how to imitate actions that are modeled by their play partner or their caregiver, rather than specifically teaching a gesture in one particular context. So this approach really takes a combination of those different intervention strategies I just reviewed, and it allows them to target multiple gestures concurrently. And the basis of reciprocal imitation training is in imitating the gestures that the child's produced, imitating the vocalizations the child's produced, as well as their actions with objects and toys. And then expanding upon that by using some contingent imitations skills, as well as contingent reinforcement, and even includes physical prompting as an intervention strategy. It's really an adaptable intervention, and we've given you several resources throughout our time together for different models of intervention packages, and you'll see theories of reciprocal imitation training kind of woven throughout many of the different intervention packages that we've shared with you, including the Project Impact Manual. Finally, I just wanted to remind ourselves that ultimately the goal when it comes to teaching social communication skills is this integration of verbal and nonverbal communication. So we're really looking for this triad of communication. And so that means that as we are targeting individual skills, be it a gesture or a form of communication, we also want to make sure that we are building towards this coordination. So while we might start by teaching a particular skill in isolation, say a gesture like a reach, we would ultimately want to continue to increase the expectation for the behavior before it's a true communicative bid by rewarding things such as that combination of gaze and gesture together, and then ultimately producing some sort of vocalization along with that gaze. So it's really about balancing all of these strategies together in your naturalistic approaches to teaching gesture. So with that, I'll change it over to Jori, who's going to bring us all together through our three-part series to talk about a specific case example.
All right, can everyone see that? Okay, thank you. I look forward to this. So the first part today actually is really focused specifically on the intervention strategies in the context of building gestures. Now, as we end our last session with you today, we wanted to take a step back and provide an opportunity to bring everything together, which includes social communication more broadly. Our case example today is a 2.5-year-old male, bilingual, and he was referred to us for speech delays and a history of motor delays and possible autism spectrum disorder. At the time of his bilingual speech evaluation in March 2024, he'd been receiving OT and PT for some time and had just begun receiving speech therapy services. Let's just take a few seconds to review some of the information that we received during the speech and language evaluation. I want to take a moment to highlight a couple things that the parents mentioned in the report, because we're going to circle back to these when we collaborate with the family to develop goals. Specifically, that he's not saying any words yet. He's babbles, but it's not directed toward anyone. He does not wave hi or bye or shake or nod his head. And he easily approaches other people and attempts to interact, but really doesn't have that initiation or gestures to do that. Standardized testing and observations were used to obtain a better understanding of his speech and language development. And as far as standardized assessment, the PLS-5 was administered with the caveat that standardization truly was not followed, because we had the caregivers serving as the interpreters. They were asked to repeat the stimulus items in their native language following the clinician. We know the PLS-5 can be really limited in the amount of information it gives us on social communication. So naturally, we completed observations to obtain additional information to gain a better understanding of their strengths and differences with their social communication. Findings on the PLS did indicate moderately below average in both receptive and expressive language skills. As far as the informal portion of this evaluation, naturalistic observations of the child and parent were obtained. We used a form similar to this one to collect data. This should look familiar to you from our second session. If you remember, we can use this form or something similar to tally the number of communication forms that occur while simultaneously tallying in what context they occur or what function they have. Let's use this form or think about this form as we watch the video of this young boy interacting with his parents to get a better understanding of his social communication skills. The video you're going to see is of this family that's living in rural Utah. They own a hotel, and this was obviously all done through telehealth. The interaction was, they own a hotel and live there, and the interaction was completed in the entry or the office area, which is also his play area. Prior to the taping of this observation, the parents were instructed just to do what they normally do when they're playing with them, just pretend like I wasn't there. The dad took the lead in playing with the child, while the mother stood back and did taping on the iPad. So as you're watching the video clip, think about what social communication forms you see him using and for what purpose. Or are there two forms coordinating together and for what purpose? So as you're watching, feel free to put these in the chat box. So what forms of communication did you see in the video or observe? Yep, making eye contact with dad to see if he's putting attention into what he's doing. Yep. Gestures, a lot of eye gaze shifts, sharing, grabbing his hand. Yep. Right. So he used a lot of those, he was using his eye gaze shifts to get attention, to engage his dad in an activity. He used his gestures to get his attention or to request and to protest. I think that's in a later video, but yes. So he prompted joint attention by physically grabbing his dad's hand, opening it, putting a block in it, and he did use eye gaze quite a bit. So overall, his social communication was not bad based on this limited sample. Before I move on to the next slide, are there any comments that you have about the interactions with the father and the son? Anything that stood out to you? Yep, he had really nice social communication. What about his speech and his sound and his Yep, some non-word vocalizations. Right. So if we use this form or something similar, we're going to combine what we know about the caregiver report, our testing, and our observations to highlight the assessment results. And what we've learned from the caregiver report is that his main means of communication is leading his parent or giving a parent a preferred item. And we saw that in the previous slide. We also learned from the caregivers that he does not use any other gestures such as waving or head nods. We also know he doesn't use any words. So based on our observations, we've learned that his eye contact is pretty good. And overall, he's showing the use of a couple gestures integrated with eye contact and an occasional sound. We also note that he has a limited use of sounds and no words. So we have a pretty good sense of what the child's doing from the caregiver report and our observations. With that, we can take this information to begin that discussion with the parents to develop goals. And when we look at the parent goals for their child, their first goal for their child is to be able to tell them what he wants or needs. So based on what the parents have said and what we're observing, he's not doing this yet. He's only using a small sampling of gestures. We know there's a large range of gestures, but currently really what he's doing and the parents are reporting is to lead his parent by the hand or give them things. But the parents want more of a range in which he communicates his needs and wants to them. Ultimately, the parent's goal is to have their child verbally communicate. And this is an appropriate goal for the long term, but in the short term, the family needed to have a greater understanding of how to achieve or reach their goal. This gave us the opportunity to practice what we've been talking about the past couple sessions, having a discussion with parents about the development of social spoken language. So I tend to go to the analogy of the ladder to describe this with the parents and the steps in order for their son to speak. We helped them to better understand in order to get to that verbal communication of his needs and wants. We really needed to fill in those missing rungs by teaching a range of gestures for communication, as well as developing a greater range of sounds prior to achieving that spoken language. So once the parents gain a better understanding of how we achieve their long-term goal of speaking through introducing a range of gestures and opportunities for developed speech, we can talk about the goals. So ultimately, the long-term goal is for speaking, and overall, they had a good understanding that we're going to work on gestures to increase the range and for the functions that he is communicating. So knowing what we know about the child's motivation and interest in the caregiver report, the caregiver goals, and the child's current skills, what are some suggestions you might have for short-term goals for the parents or for using gestures? What things come to mind that you might suggest to the family? You can put them on the chat or add, but for the sake of time, I think I'm going to keep going because we're almost out of time, or we are out of time. But the goals that we came up and what we decided with the family is for the first few months, we decided to target, we talked about using a wave to go greet hotel guests or high fives, shaking his head in protest. The parents ultimately decided they wanted the goal to have them communicate a choice between two items with an open hand reach, which eventually we could progress into a point. Although this isn't the most challenging goal, it did provide the opportunity to generalize that reach throughout the day for the child, but it also provided an opportunity for the parents to build up their confidence in their teaching with the child, and creating a variety of opportunities for communication throughout the day as they provided more choices. Because what we know with this family is that really they kind of, with all good intentions, they knew when he wanted to eat, they knew when he wanted to drink, they knew when he wanted to go outside because he would lead them. But they weren't really giving a lot of opportunities for that communication to develop. And so we knew that it would be reinforcing for the parents. And then once they achieved making choices, we could also transition to introducing other gestures. And this being said, we also at the same time we're going to get to is more of those foundational skills so we can start introducing speech as well. Ashley spoke a lot about a variety of strategies or prompts to teach gestures. And based on what we heard on today, what sort of prompts or strategies would you use to encourage making choices with a reach? And I like the one that Maria put in, start giving options beginning. Do you want to play with blocks or cars and giving them choices throughout the day? Exactly. And that's right. We incorporated a lot of modeling, language, sounds. What we started really doing, and you're going to see the final video clip in a minute. But what we ended up doing is starting with establishing really a foundation. And the foundation was teaching or coaching the father in developing the skills that leads more opportunities for teaching new skills. So those foundation skills or strategies that we included into coaching for the initial few sessions included following the child's lead, working on positioning, imitation of gestures and sounds and body movements, and modeling single words. So that's what we really emphasized the first few sessions, and the exaggeration and the animation. So let's take a look at this final clip of the same child and his father. This session was in the early stages of intervention. Prior to this session, we had worked with the father in coaching him on positioning, following the child's lead, imitation, modeling, and then most recently had introduced playful obstruction and balanced turn taking with him.
Thank you guys so much for all of that. I don't see any comments or questions in the chat. Just so everybody knows, I will be giving everybody a copy of those slides as they become available to us, but they will also be on our Canvas page for you to access. We've learned so much from you guys. So I'm gonna, if nobody has anything that they want to share or comment on, I'll give it a minute. If not, I'm going to ask Shelby to come on, and she's going to be our case presenter today.
Thanks, you guys. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Shelby, you're up.
Okie dokie. All right. So, my name is Shelby Clark. I am a speech language pathologist with the Infant Development Program in Minot, North Dakota. I am, let's see, working with a little girl, two and a half. Recently, within the past year, diagnosed with NR2F1 related neurodevelopmental disorder. It's a genetic condition characterized by developmental delay, ranging from profound to mild, is commonly associated with hypotonia, visual impairment due to optic nerve abnormalities, and or cerebral visual impairment, epilepsy, and behavioral issues like autism or ADHD. She has a lazy eye strabismus in the right eye that, from what mom has told me, has somewhat corrected itself. They patched for a while, and then she had glasses, I think, for a while, but does not wear glasses any longer. Chronic ear infections and low muscle tone. She lives at home with her parents. Mom is pregnant with baby number 2 and is an OT. Dad is a farmer and an auctioneer, and they are very close with their extended family. So for current skill level, gross motor, she's not yet walking, but she crawls everywhere, pulls herself to stand using any surface. This morning, mom said she's been scaling all of the walls in their home, and spends much of her time walking in tall kneeling. She manipulates various toys during play, switches between hands when self-feeding. Expressive language, she's got some words, but they all sound very similar, and just not super spontaneous. I feel like a lot of them either have to be imitated or prompted of some kind. Her receptive language seems to be appropriate. She follows simple directions when she wants to. She uses a spoon or a fork to scoop or poke, but she prefers to use her fingers when feeding. Cognitive skills seem to be fairly appropriate for her, I guess, abilities. Like sometimes her muscle tone makes it difficult for her to do specific tasks like building a tower or something like that. Social skills, she's so social, always smiling, always loves to give hugs and giggles and laughs and always happy. Vision, she recently had a CVI assessment in fall 2023 that indicated no concerns, and then a follow-up appointment with the ophthalmologist after that assessment indicated no more need to wear the glasses. She has frequent ear infections and just got PE tubes maybe 2 weeks ago, so that's been good. Mom's primary areas of concern are her lack of communication, which causes frustration and crying. Her attention span is pretty limited, so it makes it difficult to build some of those functional play skills. And then the delays in gross motor skills causes more frustration when she's unable to go where she wants, or mom having to carry her everywhere when they're out in public. Goals. These are just goals from our IFSP. Independently drink and eat using a cup and utensils. Independently move toward her toys using motor skills, which I think is walking. Will communicate using purposeful words, and will participate in and attend to fine motor activities. Some barriers, she gets sick often, a lot, and usually gets ear infections when she's sick. And every time there is, I don't want to say significant regression, but there's notable regression every time she's sick. And then coming home at the end of the day is typically a struggle. Mom did say this morning it's been a little bit better over the past week, but she does still tend to be extra fussy. And mom can't usually figure out what she wants. Let's see. Last week they met with an orthopedist, and she said the appointment went really great. He was amazed with her progress and abilities, but suggested getting her fitted for Sure Step SMOs, and they go back next week to get those fitted. They also did x-rays of her hips, and she does not have any hip dysplasia. So I guess some of the main suggestions mom was looking for was suggestions on dealing with communication delays, mostly how to avoid that frustration when she's unable to communicate a want or need, because mom was explaining that she tends to, it seems like she doesn't know what she wants when she gets frustrated. So is it the communication frustration, or is she just to that point where at the end of the day, she doesn't even know what she wants, and that's what's making her frustrated? Also, when she's crying and unable to move on or transition from a situation or an activity, how to handle it instead of just giving into what she wants, which is typically revolving around going outside lately. And then just some general gross motor SMO suggestions.
Great, thank you, Shelby, for that presentation. We will be moving Shelby in and out of the breakout groups, so we're gonna let you guys ask her those questions when she's in your breakout group. I'm gonna talk about who is gonna be in those breakout groups. So Kurt, you're gonna be the lead for the question on general gross motor and SMO suggestions. Rebecca, you're going to be the leader for when she's crying and unable to move on from transition, the situation, how to handle this. And we are combining that with Heather, is also going to be in that group, and it's also suggestions on dealing with communication delays. Crystal, your group is going to how to avoid frustration when she's unable to functionally communicate a want or need. Shayna has put those into the breakout, the chat button. Again, if you guys are willing to, please turn on your cameras. This is a great time to get to know everybody on the call. Shayna is going to go ahead and put us into breakout sessions. So if you'll see that and click on that and join those, and we'll come up with some great strategies. Welcome back, everybody. We do have a few minutes, so I'm going to go through one idea from each person's breakout group. And because Kurt was just so nice to me, I am going to have him go first. So Kurt.
Yeah, thanks. So we had a room full of, there's a couple of other specialists, but it was primarily developmental specialists. And it was, there were some really good suggestions about motivating her, keeping things up at eye level rather than down low. So we're not constantly doing this with our vestibular system. As far as vision goes, we talked a little bit about vision and the role vision plays in particularly balance in the standing position. And so looking and making sure that, if glasses are needed, I think Shelby came in later on and said she had glasses previously and wasn't using them now. So maybe that's not an issue, but anytime you have any kind of balance issue, one of the first things to look at is vision, and is there a need for glasses or some sort of accommodation to help that vision be more clear. So
Great. Crystal, how about your group?
So we had the suggestions for frustration, and we had some good discussion around that routine of that night when it becomes a little bit challenging, maybe doing some things proactively, finding ways of both helping that transition home to work better, or mom's maybe give the child something to do, but then also thinking ahead to the new baby and some ways of helping with all transitions and the transition to being an older sibling. And so talked about maybe giving her a baby bottle to help feed the baby, or reading books while feeding baby, things like that.
Those are great ones. Rebecca, your group.
So we had lots of good ideas too, but one of the things that we kind of circled back around to was just the idea of preparing her for those transitions, coming home in the evening, the mealtime routine. So using that first then approach, and then just verbally preparing her, possibly looking at using a switch device to give her some choices, and using visuals when possible.
Great. Well, those sound like some wonderful recommendations that you guys have. I love hearing and seeing all the recommendations that come through. Whoever was the note taker, if you will remember to send those to Kate, and she's not here to drop in her email. So email those to earlyecho@usu.edu if you do not have Kate Bennington's email, and I'll forward those on to her. Again, those are always going to be on our Canvas page. So if you want to listen and see which ones might work with some of the families you're currently working with, please double check and check those out. They're always a great one. Our next session, it starts our 4-part series on the NICU. So we will be learning all things NICU. Rebecca Foster is going to be our presenter in July, who will be talking to us about that. So hopefully we see you guys July 3rd, and enjoy the rest of your day.